Good morning, everyone, and welcome to IEA's 16th webinar of 2022. On behalf of the IEA, I'm very pleased to welcome you to our discussion today. My name is Jacqueline Kagume, and I work at the IEA under the Constitution, Law and Economy program. So the agenda for our discussion today is basically an assessment. We are trying to do an assessment of the Kenya Kwanza plan that was launched on the 30th of last month. That's, I think, Thursday last week. But before we get into the main content of it, I'll just provide a quick background about the IEA. So the IEA is a public policy think tank, and basically we conduct research, policy analysis, and use the outcomes of that for policy engagement and to influence and inform decision making in the country. We work across 6 program areas, and that's from public finance management. We have a program on constitution, law, and the economy, where I work together with my colleague Leo, who I'll introduce shortly. We have a program on trade and development, economic regulation and competition policy, another on futures and foresight, and a special programs which basically deals with popular economics. So that's how IEA's work is structured, and our main goal and objective, besides policy making, one of our other goals is to provide civic education on important, or what we think are topical issues that should be of concern to the citizen, and basically just to provide that evidence-based public education to help the citizenry to make informed decisions on different things. So some of you attended a webinar similar to what we are having today, which we had just about a month ago after the Azimio coalition launched their manifesto. And we are all aware of the background right now, the political context that we are in at the moment. So we have about 32 elections, and we have elections are obviously contested, and we have 4 coalitions and 2 independent candidates. And so of the front runners, we have the Azimio coalition, who launched their manifesto about a month ago, and we have the Kenya Kwanza coalition that launched their plan. We had an opportunity to look at the Azimio plan, and today, as we promised in our last discussion, we are going to be, a team of my colleagues conducted analysis of the Kenya Kwanza plan. And so as part of our work, we decided to convene this discussion to share our findings, our thoughts, and basically some insights that could educate the voter to make an informed choice, and to be able to sort of compare between what we had the other time and what we have today. So that stated, I think most of you have already listened into part of the discussions that are in the public regarding the manifestos. But what we are presenting today is the IEA analysis and our position regarding what the plan provides. And to do that, we have a 4-part presentation. So 3 of my colleagues will take us through the presentation. To begin with, we will have my colleague Leo. Leo works with me under the Constitution, Law and Economy program. Leo will provide an introduction, basically help us understand what the Kenya Kwanza plan proposes. They have stated basically how they intend to deliver if they are elected into office. And so, different from the 10-point plan that we discussed last time, what is contained in this. So Leo will provide an introduction and then go into the discussions in terms of the key sectors, what they propose to do under agriculture, transforming micro, small, and medium. Their proposals on housing, healthcare, and the digital superhighway. So if you've had a listening to some of the discussions before this, you know that those are some of their primary areas of focus. And then secondly, we'll have my colleague Emmanuel. So Emmanuel works under the Trade and Development Program, and he will unpack the manifesto in terms of what their proposals are with regards to manufacturing, infrastructure broadly, services, the environment, and a bit of climate change. And then the third part of the presentation, we'll have my colleague Maureen. Maureen will basically help us understand what are some of the social protection measures and this Kenya Kwanza plan, and looking at what they've proposed or what they say they will do in terms of the women agenda, foreign policy, and regional integration. And then after that, we'll have the fourth and final part of the presentation where conclusions. So I urge you to listen in very keenly. If you have any question, we have a chat box on this platform. So kindly, you can note the questions as we go, but I'd also encourage you to engage us during the plenary session. You'll be allowed to ask your questions verbally. So I welcome you once again, and I invite now my colleague Leo to take us through the first part of the presentation. Leo, you're welcome.
Yeah. Good morning, everyone. My name is Leo Kemboy from the Institute of Economic Affairs. I'm going to take you through the plan, and so as Jackie has explained, we'll have an introduction and then specific sections and then conclusions from what we see. But throughout the plan, as we go through each section by section, we'll have our views, and based on the analysis that we've undertaken and what we know from economic policy practice and general public policy. So an introduction, part of what the Kenya Kwanza plan had is that they observed three things, that they have a section called a perfect storm, and they observed three things. So the question of now rising inflation and interest rates, and it comes from COVID-19, stimulus in major economies, and the war in Ukraine. And then, of course, the fiscal distress question. The IE has been discussing this question in the public sphere for the last 8 years. And of course, they have an issue also with the structural imbalances and weaknesses in the real economy. So that's part of their introduction. Of course, and then they have the question, because the plan is called the bottom-up economic approach, is that based on the explanation that they give on that section, is that there is a dichotomy. There's workforce of 19 million, of which 3 million are in the formal sector. So if you have to think of it, while the rest 16 million work for the micro, small, medium enterprises. So it's like a pyramid where most people are at the bottom. Then they say they have the reasons is that there is an hostile environment for micro, small, medium enterprises. And then they say core problem is access to capital. We don't know that only those two factors explain the existence of that dichotomy. But there could be many other factors. And then for them, the argument is that the primary role of economic policy is to mobilize and influence allocation of capital to generate most benefits for the country. So employment, equitable distributions, income, economic stability, tax revenue, and also increasing forex. And then they define what is bottom up as investing limited capital available at the bottom of the pyramid. So that's their theory of essentially why bottom up. But because we'll start a question when they have specific economic policy, now tying back to that theory. And then they have what you call the implementation plan. And there are 4 steps that a plan must, any economic plan that will be implemented must have. So 4 steps: prioritization, sequencing, financing, and delivery. So prioritization has 6 objectives, which is to reduce cost of living, eradicate hunger, create jobs, expand tax base, improving forex, FX, and then also inclusive growth. And then, of course, they have sequencing. There are things that they've classified as short-term quick wins, short-term, long-term, medium-term, and long-term. And then financing. So the reason why I've put up this slide is specifically for this section on financing. They summarize, they have four key issues: that the revenue projection will not exceed the average growth for the prior 3 years. And the argument is that while Treasury projects something like 20-24% revenue growth, the growth is always something like 12%. So and this has been the primary problem for the deficit that Kenya has had. And then they're capping that expenditure growth at 75% of revenue growth. So, and then of course they want to pursue budget neutrality. So there are certain economic plans that might not require fiscal direct spending from government. And then of course, the second issue is to have an infrastructure bank where they'll have privatization proceeds. So the intent here is that they're going to have a privatization plan. Then aid resources is to go to water, health, education, environment, and climate change. And then pending bills, securitization of outstanding pending bills subject to verification. And then delivery, focus on value chain approach. I think one thing to say about this is that it's a good plan. I know each coalition will have a similar plan on how they're going to prioritize and implement the specific projects. It's a good thing because the last 10 years, this has not been something that has been applied, because what happened is the outgoing administration went on a fully fledged fiscal expansion where everything and the spending was significant, and the principle in economics that resources are scarce and resources are limited. So now that's part of the introduction. Now to start specifically, so one of the things that we observe from this plan is that there's some sort of coherent reasoning. You start with a problem, you define the problem, you define the solutions, and then you write up the commitment. So that's, I think, going forward, and because Kenya, even in the future, plans, economic plans like these ones, and the one that we discussed for the Azimio, is going to be a prominent feature. I think that sort of sets the baseline, what an economic plan should look like. So there are things that so the reasons in agriculture, they have listed 7 reasons why they think agriculture should be the #1 priority. So the first one being that quick turnaround, to reduce cost of living, increase forex, because that this is one area that they think that that export crops, much of Kenya's export can come from jobs, income, ending poverty, and industrialization. Some of the community working capital to farmers, modern agricultural risk management tools, and then they list credit, the guaranteed minimum returns, insurance schemes, forward contracts, futures contracts, price stabilization schemes. And then, of course, the third issue is to raise productivity, input finance and extension support, revamp export crops, and boost value chains. In this section is a guaranteed minimum returns, because first, even if the minimum returns, because this is similar to if that program was to work, it will offer disproportionate surplus to large-scale farmers, and that in itself contradicts the political philosophy around the Kenya Kwanza, that they're working for hustlers and not dynasties. And GMR, and the GMR here they're speaking about is for scheduled crops, which is like plantation crops, basically. The significant share of Kenyan farmers, like the largest number of farmers, as the small scale older farmers. If you have, so those, and most of them, for those are not part of that scheduled crops. But the benefit incidence of this would go to large scale farming. This is just even debating whether the guaranteed minimum return would work or not. Because this is like, so that these farmers are not able to get shocks from the market, that come from the market. So, and that is where we think that everything else put aside, up to when you bring the GMR component in, that is something that, of course, would negate the essence of having the plan. Of course, and then the transforming micro, small, medium enterprises. And here the reasoning is that 10 million Kenyans, half of the workforce, and are underutilized resource, and they are working in this sector. End criminalization of work, which they intend to trading license, to have to codify a law that will protect the process of trading, to ensure that they get a trading license and a trading location entitlement. Regressive tax, bureaucracy, and regulatory compliance costs. To deal with that, they're going to deal with the question of access to finance, and then they're going to deal with the question of infrastructure and capacity building. So, in essence, some of the things are things that we agree with. All those things that we agree with. But the question, for example, on access to finance, if the market is not able to give credit, to expand credit access, we think that part of it is, if the financial, which is basically what that aspect of financial intermediation, and it's a good explanation. The good thing is that they recognize that there are 4 segments. There's the banking, there's the SACCOs, there's the informal ones like chamas, and others. Why is financial intermediation failing? Because we think that any should come from the market, and not, why have they not considered something like other policy instruments rather than fiscal policy? That this is money that would come directly from spending. So, and if there is a market failure, I think a little bit of more detail on why they've considered fiscal policy and not the other instruments is something that they should mention. Another issue is the question of trading license. Trading license is a county function, and we all know most counties rely primarily on revenue from this. So execution part is the question. Also is why are they intervening directly on county, on some specific county functions? Are they going to have to build consensus with Council of Governors or at the intergovernmental level to be able to deal with that? Or is it a question of major urban areas only? Because this question of space is also a major urban area, an urban areas problem. So there are things that we agree, like question of taxation, those regressive taxes, those bureaucracies, regulatory compliance costs, and I think that should be global. Some commons across all manifestos. That there is no way as a small business of something of a turnover like not more, less than 300,000 annually should be asked for 13 licenses in any part of that. Is something that, so most of the things we agree, so with the exceptions of those, the question of housing and settlement. So they've divided into two: urban housing and rural housing and settlement. So they want to have increased supply of new housing to 250,000, number of low cost mortgages from 30K to a million, developer incentives to build affordable house. So our problem, housing major problem, is two questions. So Kenyan housing problem, is there really a supply problem? Because if there is a supply problem and prices are adjusting, they would be able to, the response from the market would be evident. So we think that housing problem in Kenya is largely a quality issue. And what are some of the interventions that should come from? So if you're living, for example, in an house that is mud walled in an urban area, and you have iron sheet on top, but you are not able to upgrade, for example, to get to connect sewer to heat, to connect sewer to heat, or to connect um, or improve the quality of walls through use of cement and stones and whatever, then it should come from the factor market. The intervention should come from the factor market. Um, and then a third issue is competition. Uh, Part of the steel industry in Kenya is a little bit is protected. There are those with there are questions about competition questions around that. There are competition questions. So the local cement industry is also that part. If you introduce competition, uh, what it will do to cement and other things. So I think a more broader thinking around this area is required, and that those are some of the issues we raise. We even there's, for example, even if you how are you going to grow low cost mortgages from 30K to 100? There are, for example, some theories that Nairobi land market is a bubble, that you have land that's extremely expensive, that in essence will not be. So are they going to burst the bubble? And more, it's not, the execution part is not the way. There are two things on this housing market also. There's desired demand. Like, for example, I'd like to live in a penthouse, but there is effective demand. I can only live in a bedsitter. Those are two comparative, because then it means that this is an income problem, and the response in the labor market would shift outcomes in this sector. So it's a more connected problem. It's not like a one-off. On the housing and settlement part, they have the settlement fund, which is similar to the one from the independence. So this is a redistribution mechanism. Then it brings equity considerations. Why are you, for example, opting person X to the settlement fund and not person Y? Even if we are in the same place, even in the same village, and the rationale of providing that. I think this is one of the things that questions need to be raised. What could be the rationale? And why are you opting X instead of Y? And those equity considerations needs to be raised. So healthcare. I think one of the well-written chapters, if we're to say so, would be the healthcare side of the in this manifesto. So there is a little bit more of thinking and then specificity on the issues. So they are proposing to have a 3-tier coverage system where they'll have the fully financed primary health care, preventive, promotive, outpatient, and basic diagnostic services. And then this financed system, PHC program, primary healthcare program, would give patients choices between public and private providers, including those that are faith-based. And so but it is based on the regulated tariff. I'll speak about the regulated tariff later. And then the second issue is seamless insurance system, which is mandatory uh, and private insurance as a complementary cover. And then the third issue is National Fund for Chronic Illness and Injury and Chronic and Catastrophic Illness and Injury Costs funded from an insurance levy and GOK. So that's the only part. So some of the issues to raise about this is first, the nature of that regulated tariff. This is like some form of incentive regulation. How do you charge a tariff and ensure that you guarantee quality? You guarantee something like long-term development service. You guarantee and other challenges that come from that form of incentive regulation. So they want to prepare to have a system where they regulate, and then so you are matching up a controlled market with properties of a competitive market. And I think the thinking around that in itself first, given that healthcare is an social and economic rights, is good. But however, the questions about the challenges of that incentive regulation, that regulated tariff, is something that will pertain, because once somebody cannot recoup, once a provider cannot recoup costs, the micro markets start to emerge, and the whole system start to crumble. I think that's one of the issues that needs to be addressed, and would form a problem. The second issue is questions of competition in healthcare. We understand that some of the largest providers in and they are the ones that are the premium. So I think part of that, what market share, who holds the dominance, is that dominance being abused or something like that? Competition questions, just general competition questions around healthcare need to be debated. And then implementation and reforms, there are 4 issues. Supply, stakeholder managed procurement schemes, stakeholder primary healthcare funds and as a strategic purchasers at level 4, human resource reforms to mediate between counties and doctors on health service commission, health information system, NHIF reforms, separate fund management claims and regulatory functions. Questions, we have questions especially on human resource, because that's the biggest problem I think that faces the health sector. What are they helping doctors avoid accountability questions to counties? And then, so that is part one, because we cannot decided that whatever happens, doctors have to be devolved, because these doctors have not been able to go to, there's this game that who deploys which doctor to what part of the country is the most lucrative business before 2010. And this question of accountability is a clock that has been reversed. Doctors are devolved. That is something that most people need to, and I don't think that even if it was subjected to a referendum again, that somebody would agree to the same. Then, because the persuasion comes from the training part, that we lack because doctors do not have resources to be able to undertake this training. If there is a question of deficit in training or specialization, then increase training. And that is something, if they want to give direct training 3,000 per year, train 10,000 or train 15,000. And then NHIF accountability. It's a good thing they talked about separating the functions. One thing that should come out clear is there are things such as hiring, and most people, and the trust deficit from the public, because a larger problem with NHIF is that there are members fund. People have to contribute so if you don't if there is, for example, a skewed incentives by the virtue that you work in formal or in informal sector, or it's not based on the kind of contribution that you make, that there are a lot of things that need to be dealt with. And then hiring issues. This one needs to be taken away from political power, because when NHIF becomes a big fund as it is now, and political competition, who wins decides who sits where and everything, we all know what happens after that. So that needs to be taken away from politicians. So the last slide for here is the question of the digital superhighway and creative economy. They want to do broadband 100,000 kilometers, automation of GeoK services, 80% of GeoK services, promote software development for export, digital master plan, reduce cost of calls and data. So first issue is extent of automating GeoK services. How far can you go on that? Because I think 80% of that is an overstatement. The second issue is a question of, if you want to reduce calls on cost of calls and data, you allow for competition. But again, we have a unique problem. Safaricom, as it is, and as Nushin mentioned, the farm, the leading farm market, the leading farm that owns a significant market share, enjoy network effects because of one way or the other, either the liberalization, the time they stayed in the market, that kind of thing. So part of, I think, competition questions, how do we allow for more choices? How do we deal with the restrictive practices? How do we deal? There are several other things. How do we deal with some tariffs that the CAK has put forward? All that. And then, of course, it's a good thing they're thinking of promoting software development for export. But again, software development, developing that capability is a factor of human capital. And that it comes from specialization and training in the labor market, expanding the base in the labor market. So I think part of this should go with a corresponding, you are going to provide incentives for that software development, like people train in that area and train more and train at a faster pace. Because I remember one of the conglomerates, biggest global firms, hired software engineers from the Kenyan market, and they cost a glut. And we hear the kind of hiring that they did, it's only not even more than 1,000. So I think a level of training and that kind of is something that should have considered. And then for creative economy, a film fund, a creative economy bill, industry portal, promote art galleries abroad. For music, they want entrepreneurship from the Hustler Fund. They are going to leverage the Hustler Fund for this. Enforcement of copyright laws, mobile tunes, everything largely agreed with. First question, licensing regime, inter-county licensing regime is a county function. And then other forms of interventions. I think limiting it only to direct government spending, what will come through the Hustler Fund, is a limitation. And of course, there are things that they've considered that are good things, like Green Channel Immigration Scheme for film directors to come to Kenya, and to benchmark destination film ecosystem. Those are kind of things, but we think broader interventions from other sectors. So I'll ask my colleagues, Jack, if it's okay to pick up from here. Emmanuel.
Yes, sure. Thank you. Thanks, Leo. Yeah, Emmanuel can pick up.
Yeah, next slide, please. So again, as we continue with the analysis, we are concerned with understanding what the priorities of Kenya Kwanza are, assessing their policies, their commitments in terms of whether they understand the role of government and the difference between the role of government and the role of the markets, and then to also ask a few questions about the opportunity cost. So we're just having a quick glance at what we think are some of the highlights of the document. So as you continue reading for yourself, you can build on what we've said. Now, on infrastructure, I think on the onset, we can see that the prioritization of infrastructure does, as a whole, makes a lot of sense. You know, for a country that has an infrastructure deficit that is just evident in our daily lives, from the water shortages that we experience quite frequently in the major cities, including most notably Nairobi and other localities. You know, as close by as Athi River and as far as the northeastern and regions. So, is there previous slide, please, on water? Okay, next slide. Right. So with electricity, Kenya Kwanza has made a commitment to improve reliability and bring down the cost of electricity, and we find them here building on the ongoing rural electrification process. They do acknowledge the fact that a KPLC is somewhat dysfunctional, which to their credit for acknowledging that. But we would also note and point out the fact that the model that was used to build to actually institute rural electrification was actually saddle the KPLC with a heavy debt that is one of the major concerns for that unit, because we had a administration that decided that it was a good idea to increase the supply of electricity without considering the structure of the market. So electricity has very, very high fixed costs for installation, and it takes a while to recuperate, to get your returns on that investment. So that means that demand must be high enough to actually meet the supply at a price where the electricity will be made available. So looking at economic principles, what we can see is that electricity was supplied to markets that were not ready to meet the price that would be required to actually keep a unit like KPLC functioning in an economically viable way. So that's what brings us to where we are today. The Kenya Kwanza platform also wants to strengthen consumer protections in the area of electricity, and one of their bold plans is to increase electronic e-mobility, that e-mobility. So they have a plan to increase, to actually begin to install vehicle charging infrastructure, and through financial and tax incentives for public service vehicle conversion to electric. And they say that they will leverage what they call the Hustler Fund to develop electronic vehicle motorcycle assembly. So in the first place, again, we would have liked to see what their assessment of the future demand for electric vehicles. If we look at the United States, where and some parts of Europe where they have actually installed vehicle charging infrastructure, that infrastructure is still it's not as widespread as petroleum and gas refueling infrastructure. And part of an economist might look at that and just with those basic facts. If you have, I believe it's about 6,000 charging stations in the United States, but I can verify those numbers. That's a function of demand. So supply has responded to demand. Yes, people are driving Teslas, but it's not as many people who are driving Teslas. I mean, relative to everyone else. Yes, a company like Tesla has a very high valuation. You might look at that on the face of it and maybe believe that we are on the verge of a radical shift towards electric vehicles. But what we would like to see is Kenya Kwanza platform that explains their rationale. Maybe they know something we don't know. Let's have a look at that. When they state that they will leverage a hustler fund to develop electronic vehicle motorcycle assembly, that is also something of a point of concern, because here we would ask ourselves that, look, why should public funds be used to the benefit of one specific economic sector? Perhaps if you are selling maize, or you are manufacturing alcohol, for example, you might ask why the government can't also create a fund to help you assemble your maize or assemble the beer. That's simply to say that a hustler fund, it might sound good to some constituency, but it doesn't quite hold up to the economic principle of just simply distinguishing between the role of government and the role of the markets. Perhaps this is something developing an electric vehicle motorcycle assembly plant is something that the open market will figure out. It's something for the entrepreneurs to do and not for the government. So on the whole, what we can see here is we have a KPLC that is saddled with debt, and Kenya Kwanza plans to put KPLC in a position where it has to respond to market incentives, right? So our first question would be, why in one instance would you want KPLC to play by the incentives of the market, and then on the other hand try to stimulate electric vehicle assembly through public funds, right? So again, the role of government and the role of the markets, there isn't a clear it doesn't exhibit an understanding of this distinction. And then the next question would be, sure, you want to put KPLC in the open market. What private player would want to get involved in running KPLC, an institution that is so saddled with debt to be extremely unattractive to the market? Who would you privatize KPLC's losses to? Again, KPLC lost money because they were forced to finance an effort that did sound good. Look, very, very difficult to argue against the idea that everyone should have electricity. It's very difficult. You'll get a lot of angry people, maybe even with pitchforks on your front lawn or in front of your office if you sound like you don't think people should have electricity. So, but fundamentally, KPLC lost money because they were forced into an economically unviable position. Next slide, please. Kenya Kwanza's petroleum commitment. Now, Kenya Kwanza has actually committed to creating a fuel stabilization, ring fencing the fuel stabilization fund. Again, developing electric motorcycle assembly industry by leveraging the Hustler Fund and incentivizing the adoption of electric mass transit. So if we think about the opportunity costs of the fuel stabilization fund, well, opportunity cost basically means we could be doing other things with this money. This money that we've been using to uh, subsidize the consumption of fuel. Not everyone drives a car, not everyone operates lorries or buses. So that means that the public funds are being used to subsidize the consumption of a few, you could even say elite uh, consumers. And not to use that term politically, but just to say that it's a select few. Okay, those who can afford to buy fuel. Perhaps those who can afford to buy fuel can afford a few shillings more that they would be charged if a subsidy didn't exist. But even more fundamentally, this money could be put to better use. For example, providing free secondary school education. See, that there is clearly public good, the public good of education. Fuel is a private good. The government should not be subsidizing private goods in a country with such a need for public for public goods, right? This seems to go against Kenya Kwanza's philosophy of a bottom up and privileging the so-called hustlers against the so-called dynasties, right? So, and then again, sorry, one more thing, just the previous slide. Finally, we don't see a structural problem in the market for electric mass transit that they have identified. So we would like to see that so we can see perhaps, again, they know something that we don't. Next slide, please. On manufacturing, Kenya Kwanza makes a very clear assessment of the problems facing manufacturing. Now, their solutions, again, they don't explain why Athi River or Narok or Isiolo and Wajir deserve market intervention using public funds. Why not any other constituency, right? If a private, what is it about the functioning of a specific market that they have found requires public intervention? So again, a bit of it's unclear the distinction between the role of the state and the role of markets, but we can see that they want more public sector involvement in the private markets, the markets, sorry, the open markets. Next slide, please. So here Kenya Kwanza also wants to make interventions that advance the market for building products. That's construction, right? Talking about window fittings, windows, bricks, the works. They would like to leverage housing products to expand the building products market and establish standards for jua kali. Now here we do see that there is actually, this is a valuable proposal, right? If you gave jua kali some standards that they can meet, it could actually increase the quality of output in these markets and help to formalize jua kali. Now, this is very much in line with the idea of supporting the hustlers. Pharmaceuticals and medical supplies. It's not clear that the state's objective should be to build a regional pharmaceutical manufacturing hub, because that is maybe something that the market should decide on its own and that the state should create the conditions under which pharmaceuticals can thrive. So addressing the tax regime and the cost of doing business, these are very, very good proposals. Next slide, please. Finally, here with garments and textiles, we would like to see more factor input interventions, more tax regime interventions, and a bit more clarity on what they believe the market, the place of the market signals are, right? They have interventions that are focused on working with apparel export industry to develop a viable cotton raw material supply chain, for example. But we would like to see the state focus on factor input intervention. So what can we do to improve the cost of factor inputs to the benefit of suppliers and then to the benefit of consumers? Next slide, please. For the services economy, the problem has been identified as market supply to that there's no market supply to the bottom of the pyramid, right? In financial services. But although they identify the problem in somewhat of a correct way, it's not, their solution seems to create more room for crowding out by the government. So already the government borrows heavily from the domestic market. So lenders find that lending to the government is more attractive than lending to the greater public. And this is one government action that actually dries up credit. So we would like to see what they think about that and what they would do to change that. But identifying that the bottom of the pyramid are lacking credit and then proposing a solution that talks about increasing the credit available to the government, for us, it's two different things. Stating that one will leverage an existing institution, right? Kenya Kwanza talks about leveraging SACCOs to improve the credit, the availability of credit, but that's not enough. You know, using the term leveraging it does not tell us enough about what exactly they will do to improve. If they think that section of the population not having credit is a problem, then they should tell us more about what exactly they want to improve. Now, finally, protecting Kenyans from predatory lenders, that is a clear and a good objective for market regulation. And in tourism, we find their assessment of the problem facing tourism, just the formulation of the problem is problematic, because what they say is Kenya's tourism industry is geared towards high-end tourism. But we would say, look, no one sat down and conspired to supply tourism products to only a select few. There is no conspiracy in the tourism industry to supply goods to people who look a certain way or are of a certain status. It simply reflects the structure of the market. If I build a hotel for low, for high income individuals, or rather price at a high price point, and I get returns from that, well, part of the problems I have to solve in order to deliver value for tourism involve security, right? And in order, so we think that if their proposal was, say, to improve the security situation, this would improve the environment for tourism, and you would see people invest in tourism products for at lower price points. So to nurture is not a policy, or to use, or the term diversify it doesn't tell us enough, right? Investments in security would increase budget tourism, but simply saying that high-end tourism is necessarily a bad thing, we find problematic. Next slide, please. Aviation. So aviation was really about trying to revive Kenya Airways, but why should the government continue to be involved in providing a private good? Public money is being used. So if I travel from here to Athi River by public means, by public transportation, right, public service vehicle, this is not subsidized by the state. But for some reason, those who can afford a $2,000 ticket or an $800 ticket from Nairobi to Paris are being subsidized by the state. There's a lack of clarity between the difference, the distinction between role of government and role of the markets. Next slide, please. So on the environment and climate change, the Kenya Kwanza platform proposes that they will establish a certain number of acres of woodlots and dry lands. We would like to understand why, how they arrive at the number that they arrive at. Why preserve, X number of woodlots? And wood fuel, we think that their proposal to decriminalize the trade in charcoal is a good thing, open up that market. But we also think that they should focus on factor inputs. So the government shouldn't get involved in trying to produce a certain kind of a cooking mechanism, but should instead allow the entrepreneurs to figure that out, because they will. And then took issue with the idea that the youth should be given a state entitlement to operating, say, briquette enterprises or enterprise. So why should the youth why should one specific group, this group in particular, right, be given some exclusive rights to trade and not any other group? We find that to be an idea that is not well explained, in terms of its economic viability. Now, on solid waste, we find an inadequate assessment of the problem. They throw around statements like, this is how it's done in Europe, so this is what we would like to do. But Europe is neither a policy nor a principle. Next slide, please. So finally, my final note on the infrastructure proposals would be, Kenya Kwanza did identify water as an important, as a constitutional right and as an important infrastructure objective. Water has many properties that allow us to treat it as a public good. And it has important implications in public health, and in waste management. So we find that Kenya Kwanza's proposal for water infrastructure to be this is a good priority. I mean, finally, with agriculture, water is a very important input. So my apologies, I think the slide for water was missing, but that is what we think about their proposals for water. So thank you. I will now hand over to my colleague, Maureen. Continue.
Okay, thank you. I'll take you through the next 5 pillars. The first one will be the Women Agenda by the Kenya Kwanza Plan. The Kenya Kwanza Plan acknowledges that women have been excluded in governance and participation, among other issues, and so they commit to doing a couple of things, and one of them being establishing the Hustler Fund. This is in a bid to provide financial and capacity building support for women. And through the Hustler Fund, they pledge to create the Hustler Fund for women-led cooperatives, the chamas and merry-go-rounds and table banking initiatives. This is to protect women from predatory interest rates, as well as the interest charged by the money lenders who've been manipulating them. Okay, the issue that we had with this is what problem with the Hustler Fund try to solve that the AGPO and Women Enterprise Fund has not solved. And this is also creation of a new fund. Why are they creating a new fund when we already have these other funds that have already been existing to cater for women, youth, among other persons? There's also the 2/3 gender rule in elective and appointed positions, as well as 50% cabinet positions for women in the first 2 years should they get to win the election. This is an impressive commitment, and it also works on implementation of the Constitution. Also, the Social Welfare Fund for Women Working Abroad. Again, this is also creation of a new fund. There's also free sanitary towels in schools and public washrooms. This is a good idea since we've seen school attendance by girls has been an issue due to lack of sanitary towels. Next slide, please. The next slide is on social protection. The Kenya Kwanza commits to, under the social protection pillar, there's their commitment to three groups. Their children, their vulnerable senior citizens, and also people living with disabilities. So for children, for children, they commit to eradicate malnutrition within. As in Kenya, 26% of children under 5 years of age are chronically malnourished, and define this as an impressive commitment to end to eradicate malnutrition, since they state that there's a national safety program that's currently providing support to approximately 1.4 million beneficiaries, and around 13 million children are in need of assistance, which means 7.5% are currently receiving the assistance. So they need to cater for all the malnourished children. Also, they commit to improving learning outcomes by pledging to connect all schools to the internet. Again, as much as they have good intentions by stating this, we all know that there are some schools that do not have classrooms. Some schools are not connected to electricity. So pledging to connect these schools to the internet seems to be like a far reach for them. Then moving on to the vulnerable senior citizens, they pledge to commit 100% in HIF coverage for senior citizens. We have the universal health coverage that has been covered under the healthcare pillar. What does the universal health care coverage mean if at all they're also pledging to have 100% NHIF coverage for senior citizens? Next slide, please. On this next slide, we have people living with disability. So for people living with disability, they commit to 100% in NHIF coverage for people living with disability by providing universal health coverage to this. We already have universal health coverage that already exists in the healthcare pillar. So what does it mean? We already have the UHC. What does the 100% NHIF coverage for PWDs mean? We also have they commit to integrate schools to allow children with disabilities to interact with the general public from an early age and restore confidence and self-esteem. This in itself is an impressive policy by allowing these children to interact with these other kids and get to familiarize themselves with this other world and being acknowledged as normal people. Okay, we also have a commitment to waiving license fees for new businesses established by people living with disabilities. We feel that the government should rather focus on provision of public goods instead of offering offers and 5% 5% market stalls for people living with disabilities. They also commit to 5% 5% space on AGPO for people living with disabilities. How about they provide public goods from a young age where these people with disabilities are enabled instead of offering waivers and these other things. Next slide, please. The next slide is still on people living with disabilities. Kenya Kwanza plan commits to placing an import duty exempt for all assistive devices and explore possibilities of partnership with domestic manufacturers to produce affordable devices. First, we think they should expand the list of assistive devices. Secondly, the import duty exempt already exists on the Persons with Disabilities Act 2003, Part 4, Article 35. Then there's also the government should also again provide public goods and commitment to all children with disabilities to get free assistive devices from government. That is, if these kids need braille, if they need crutches, if they need spectacles and all that, the government should provide all these assistive devices for free. Also, they commit to increasing capitation of pupils with disabilities by 50%. In that, they commit to set aside 15% of all public funded bursaries for pupils with disabilities. This in itself is an impressive policy that will increase financing for education for pupils with disabilities. This might increase the number of school attendance for pupils with disability. Next slide, please. The next slide is on the pillar of governance. On the pillar of governance, it's majorly implementation of the Constitution, and Kenya Kwanza commits to strengthening the Office of the Registrar of Political Parties by establishing it in all counties. Well, we think it does not give a clear reason as to why this is important. Why are they setting up these offices in all counties? They do not elaborate or rather provide better explanation as to why we really need the Office of the Registrar of Political Parties in all counties. Next, we have the ending state capture. We think this is a good idea in itself, where they commit to establishing within 30 days a quasi-judicial public inquiry to establish the extent of cronyism and state capture in the nation and named recommendation. State capture in itself is the systemic political corruption in which private interests influence a state's decision-making processes to their own advantage. And we think by establishing a quasi-judicial public inquiry in itself is a good idea. Next, we have strengthening leadership accountability and depersonalizing our politics. Kenya Kwanza commits to strengthening leadership accountability by reviewing the role of the National Cohesion and Integration Commission to repeal the NCIC Act. We think this will encourage free speech by encouraging freedom of speech instead of trying to limit free speech. Also, still under governance, it does not provide direct the Kenya Kwanza plan does not provide direct administrative actions on corruption. It does not state how are these people going to be prosecuted. It does not give explanations about such things. And also there are some pending reports, such as the TJRC report that has been published, and implementation of such reports has not happened, and the Kenya Kwanza plan does not provide an outline of whether such reports are going to be implemented. Still under governance, you have the strengthening devolution, where they said they'll ensure shareable revenue transferred to counties is done in a timely and predictable manner and in accordance with the law. This is an impressive commitment, since you've seen delayed disbursement of funds to counties by government before, and it has delayed services, public service delivery in the counties, such as healthcare. We've seen strikes and all that, and this will be an impressive commitment. Next slide, please. On the next slide, we have the pillar on security and public service. Under public service, they commit to developing strategic foresight mechanisms to anticipate and address the changing workforce requirements. We think this is a good policy that responds to the dynamic work environment, where the workforce will be updated on the new changes in the workforce. Then we have the security still, and the pillar on security and public service. For security, they commit to contributory benevolent fund for families of fallen and terminal illness officers. We think this is a legislative agenda, which is a program of proposed legislation to support policies and programs of government. And should they be elected into office, I would like to see how this rolls out, as well as the commitment on the commissioning a review to consider improvement of remuneration and terms of service. Next slide, please. Finally, on the last pillar, foreign policy and regional integration. Under this, they commit to doing a couple of things. And first, they pledge to a creative and robust foreign policy. Under this, we have the four things. We have the economic and commercial diplomacy. Under economic and commercial diplomacy, they commit to leveraging international and is a good policy. They also pledge still under the creative and robust foreign policy. There's the anchor states. Under the anchor state, they commit to lead efforts to advance regional stability and peace, and aid global initiatives to counteract violent extremism and cooperate with other countries. This in itself is also a good commitment. Diaspora engagements, where they commit to unlocking full potential of Kenyans living overseas. Also, this is a good commitment. And also the global citizenship, where they commit to supporting the work and decisions of international organizations that Kenya has joined or ratified. And also they acknowledge that Kenya houses a number of international organizations, such as the UN. Then we also have the commitment to facilitate accreditations and endorsements of Kenya's qualifications and skills with those of foreign countries for easy access into higher educations and foreign jobs by Kenyans living in the diaspora. This will increase job opportunities as well as education opportunities for Kenyans. Yeah, that's the end of my presentation. Leo.
So in our conclusion, so first, to give credit to Kenya Kwanza, the coherence in the economic plan is something that needs to be, especially for the first like 8 chapters, seven chapters, is something that was well thought, extremely well thought, because we believe that evidence should be policy, and problems. What problems are we solving? We can debate the merits of their proposals, their commitments, but in terms of the substance and how they've placed those key questions, and especially we think that the political economy analysis is one of the best that we've read amongst all these plans. So we can debate the specific merits, the merits of each specific proposal. So the first issue that we conclude with is, so overall, the consistency on role of government. We recognize as economists, for example, myself, largely that there are specific interventions that should come from government, and largely one of them that is agreed almost all by everybody is, especially when there are market failures, and so that justification is something that I think would that justification why they intervening, for example, in provision of some specific private goods, is something that should have come out more clearly. And the reason why they choose specific parts of the country and not the others, because one of the things that we know, even from choosing the winners before while crafting the policy, is something that needs to be well thought, because when the problem comes out, it becomes like the way the question of EPZs was solved in this country and by the previous governments. Kwanza, the way Kwanza was sold out, for example, why government is intervening in Kwanza. So I think a little bit of more detail is something that's required. So, and then if there are those interventions from the role of government, some programs should have sunset clause. If you are intervening in, like, for example, you're saying we're running this program for 5 years, or we are running this program for 10 years. So I think that partly that is one of the things that sunset clause. I know the plan is always for the intent and might not include execution, but for the purposes of persuasion, the plan at least should have some sunset clauses. There's a quote from Milton Friedman that there's nothing as permanent as a temporary government program. I don't know if I've quoted verbatim correctly. And then the third issue is the rationale on subsidies. One of the things that we've observed, for example, like they speak about the fuel subsidy, to ring fence the use of the fuel subsidy. the ring-fence the resources from the fuel subsidy. One problem with that is that for the last year, for example, we've seen how that fuel subsidy has caused supply shortages, and the supply shortages occurred because government couldn't keep up with paying with payments to oil marketers, because as the spread widened, the fiscal commitment became larger. Even if that 5 shillings had been collected all throughout, I think it would not be, based on the calculations, the simulations we've done, it would be very difficult to keep up with something with that. So the rationale on subsidies is something they should think about more critically, because implementation. Another question is privatization program. They mentioned that they will have proceeds of an infrastructure bank to do an infrastructure fund or bank that will be run largely from the privatization proceeds. Our biggest issue is that the rationale again on privatization. What are you privatizing? Because this anticipation, because I think maybe is it going to be via fire sale? Is it going to be what would be largely what the rule used on privatization? So, and then of course another issue is the question on competition. Competition, we didn't see much of whether they are going to revamp that. The competition, the either expand the playbook or rejig the organization as it is now. What kind of intervention, or do they expect that to come from some of those key questions on competition to come from state capture, the quasi-judicial inquiry that they're going to undertake? So there are some questions that relating to this. So those are 5 key things that we are convinced that part of what the Kenya Kwanza plan needs to address, because largely some of these market mechanisms, some of the distortions on the failure of the market not working properly explains why some sectors are lagging and the others are not. And that in itself, because if redirecting government resources in a way that in a certain way might give the intended effects and also the unintended effects. So to conclude, the focus and especially the thinking around Kenyan development is something that was, and even the reason why bottom up. So to conclude, I just want to say something about the ASLA fund, and then finish from there. The intention for having is something that to use it to address some of the specific market failures, is even if it's when it's going to, is something that, however, what is required is this, given Kenya's history and context on funds. What is required is the accountability mechanism. How is this fund different from the others? The accountability mechanism. We hear from media reporting that part of that is going to be given to some specific banks to manage, and that is something that should come out in the document. There are other questions around those specific ASLA fund, because we are praying and we know how funds are operated in this country, how political players. Sometimes even the president might have the best intention, but the people working, the people working on running the fund specifically might have a different intentions, because these are incentives and we're human beings. And this is part of the problem, that if you're proposing a fund, and in Kenyan context, given our history, there's some specific issue that needs to follow with that. So thank you. Back to you, Judge.
Okay, thank you. Thanks a lot, Leo. So I'd like to thank all our presenters, from starting with Leo to Emmanuel to Maureen. So they've taken us through what the Kenya Kwanza plan details. I think it was a very detailed analysis, so I will not attempt to recap, but just to state that in summary, that we say that, or rather IEA's analysis finds that there are certain things that what we classified as the good, and then there were other things that obviously we feel would require either a little more thinking or a little more detailed. I know it's been in the media, some of the people saying that, well, the document may have been too detailed, but I think for think tanks like ourselves, we are interested very much so in understanding the how. So basically, on the issues that we raised that require a little more clarity, I think this presentation will be shared after this. So we've stated here that in our opinion, largely the diagnosis of the problem under this manifesto was correct. It has a comprehensive political economy analysis, which we also rate as a good thing. As to whether all the solutions are viable and implementable, I think my colleagues have shared that we might require a bit more clarity with that, and most significantly is that issue of a bit of an overlap between what the plan is proposing that government shall do vis-a-vis what should traditionally be the role of the market. So we see quite a bit of an overlap, and in terms of the assessment of the type of public goods that government should provide vis-a-vis what the market should provide, and basically we think that's it's a profound thing that they should look at. And in summary, the plan is well detailed, but we raise a few questions. So that stated, I'd like now to go to plenary. I see a hand up. There has been. Okay, so I see some questions on the chat box, and I also see a hand up. So I'll start before I allow the person to voice their question. I see Andrea asks, I have 3 questions. Are all hustlers really entrepreneurs, or are a lot of these so-called survival activities? I think it's great to give more focus on making sure that people in the low-income demographic can lead dignified lives, but I suspect many people need jobs, as not everyone is cut out to be an entrepreneur and can grow a company. Then in the latter parts of the presentation, you talk a lot about an impressive commitment and nothing else. Maybe you ran out of steam. I'd certainly want to know how realistic those plans are and how they can be financed. I think she means that, well, there's a bit of is it a bit of commitment on the plan and running out of steam by the plan, or maybe you can verbalize your question, Andrea, if possible. Then finally, we didn't hear much about the national debt, so I'll ask. I'll ask my colleagues to respond to that. I see Emmanuel has already started doing so. Yeah, so that's the first. And then going to verbal questions. Dominique, I see your hand is up. Could you could kindly unmute yourself and ask your question. I'm not sure that. I hope you've been granted the right to unmute yourself. But before you can, if you're not able to do that as we work on that, yeah, I see you can't unmute. So we'll work on that. So as we work on that, I'd like to invite my colleagues to respond to Andrea's question. Let's start with Emmanuel. Emmanuel?
Thanks. Thank you, Jackie. So in response to Andrea's question, so first she says, are all hustlers really entrepreneurs, or are these so-called? So my response to that is that the entrepreneur is simply the economic actor that is allocating resources to supply goods and services, right? So I don't think that it's that the rate of success defines the entrepreneur. I mean, you could be an entrepreneur for 5 minutes and your business fails, but you were an entrepreneur for those 5 minutes. So I don't know if there's a value in distinguishing between what we have called here survival activities and other successful ones. But maybe you had another question there, and I invite you to ask that question. I can see the entrepreneur and the hustler thing out there. And then I think it's great to give more focus on making sure that people in the low income demographic can lead dignified lives. But I suspect many people need jobs. Not everyone is cut out to be an entrepreneur. So the response to that would be that the question for Kenya Kwanza would be that, okay, they want to create interventions to help, or rather their whole posture, right? The political posturing has been that there's a certain demographic they call the hustler, which we could assume are entrepreneurs with very low capital, right? And that there's another group called the dynasts who might also be entrepreneurs, but they have higher capital that they own and control, right? And so our question would be that the fact that Kenya Kwanza believes that low-income demographics should also lead dignified lives is a perspective we also share here at the IEA. So giving focus to that, I think that is also a perspective that is difficult to speak against. Now, when we say that many people need jobs, not everyone is cut out to be an entrepreneur. So from an economic perspective, you'd say, look, maybe you can adopt somewhat of a Darwinian terminology and say that entrepreneurship involves a lot of experimentation. So economic actors go out there and try and fail and hedge their bets. So one thing that we have seen from Kenya Kwanza is to say that that entrepreneurs deserve more support. Fine. We don't know if that means that the best way to go about it is to create more and more funds. So that's what we would say. I don't think finally that it's in the government's place to determine that many people need jobs, is not everyone is cut out to be an entrepreneur, but more we would say, look, we need an economic environment that's conducive to economic activity, right? And that you create the incentives and the economic actors themselves know more about what they can and cannot do, what they should do, than any central planner. So that's what I would say about that. I hope that's clear. And in the latter parts of the presentation, talk about an impressive commitment. Maybe I'll let my colleague elaborate on that. Yes, I think that's what I will say.
Thanks, Emmanuel. Leo, what would you like to add to that?
Yes. So to be fair to them, they've listed micro, small, medium enterprises. So like these small farms as a way to deal with the entrepreneurship question, because that's where they put the hustler fund. deal with so they are not necessarily calling it like entrepreneurship. They're saying we have the micro, small, medium enterprise as a stepping stone to creating jobs. So they give an example, and in the paper, that what it takes to create a formal sector job and what it takes to create an informal sector job, and saying that everything else here, we are going to redirect resources to funding that. And now they use the approach, the value chain concept approach, that say, so it's redirected in areas such as agriculture, manufacturing, another like creative economy, and other sectors. So it's not like they have a specific sector. So like if you look at agriculture, for example, the $2.5 billion, less than $2.5 billion, which is like 250 billion for 5 years, spread out on a yearly basis, that is like something like 50 billion. So in terms of even looking at what is allocated to the State Department for Crop and Research Development, of the whole together, if you put everything together, what is allocated to those to agriculture, it's around 70 billion. So it's within the range that they can they can do. So, but what they're not saying is, what are they going to defund or not? What are they going to defund? Because some resources, in part of explaining the sequence part, they're saying we're going to leave some part and others. So they're looking at it from an micro MSME perspective. And then the second part, so this can grow to a company. So farm formation is always driven by capital factor accumulation, how you accumulate capital. So if you are not able to accumulate capital, that's where there is the lag. So that's why the principal writer of this manifesto is many tweets. One of them, he says that underdevelopment is a market failure, and it's a trap that sometimes you might not get out. So you need to redirect economic policy resources to this specific section. So, and I think that is it. Now, on the question of so I think that for Andrea's question, or on debt, you've asked a question about debt. So for them, in the medium term, the only thing that we've seen from is how they're going to run the fiscal framework in that section on the implementation matrix. And they want to cap spending, expenditure cap at 75% of revenue growth. And because debt is a factor of deficits. And then they want to pursue this through the economic growth lens. So you grow quickly, you are able to. So there are two in dealing with that. There are two things. There is the cyclical part where you grow very fast at a faster rate, and then you are able to eclipse that debt. Your revenues are able to grow. Then you are able to repay that debt quicker. The Azimio manifesto for us, and we gave them thumbs up for that, had spoken about the question of reprofiling the debt, restructuring the debt. Of course, which the based on the explanation they gave on that day, is to lengthen the tenure of debt. And the markets took, which is now a voluntary mechanism. And the markets interpreted the restructuring as aggressive repudiation of debt, which is something else. But for them, they've chosen a path, and we agree with it, that it's through economic growth that those revenues are able to grow, and you're able to reduce that debt repayment as a share of total revenues. And then through time, the total debt stock is able to be eclipsed. That is what most countries, like after the World War II and after the liberalization, were able to do. That's the part that even President Kibaki took Kenya through. So he reprofiled the commercial debt, but on the other side, it's growth that actually allowed us to because this thing does not have serious financial engineering. You have to grow.
Okay. Thanks, Leo. I'd like to allow Dominic to ask his question. Dominic, if you can now unmute yourself.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so mine was first a commentary on the universal healthcare. You did mention that it doesn't really focus on the main issue is usually affordability of the medicines and the doctors, and it doesn't really focus on those two because now offering insurance is the flaw that high risk patients and low risk patients are paying the same amount. So even though let's say we are finding more cases where there are people who exceed their normal their cover limit, and also when these low risk people get to a point where they are high risk, they are not covered as they would like the NHIF to be covered. So there's that danger of the universal healthcare, and also on the pilot phase, financial strains were cited. So I don't know how that will be possible in 47 counties, also considering that in developed countries like the UK and the Japan, the financial strains is also noted. And you find that for the NHS has been it has been bankrupted a few times, where now they are running out of money, so they have to import nurses and doctors from developing countries like Kenya. So there's that. Then on the issue of the electricity and water, I think it will be better off if, let's say, we will complement both of them, where Africa itself is 2,000 feet above the sea level. So all our rivers are plunging into the ocean, and we are not taking advantage of that. If we would put micro hydrogenerators, these small generators along that, and also when there are floods, we could pump water into storage units, because the problem with our geography, we don't have the snow like Europe or North America, where the snow, when it melts, it gives them a constant supply of water. So you're finding ours, we constantly rely on rainfall. So when it comes to that, if you can put micro generators along these small rivers, that will supply electricity. And also when it comes to the electricity, our national grid is the problem, because we are finding Germany has a good national grid, but when it went green, it did not supply enough power, so they had to go all the way back to coal. Even after going green, they had destroyed all their nuclear power plants and went green power, and now they are going all the way to coal. So we should also look at that. And when it comes to e-mobility, you had mentioned that. Now the only problem is, at the moment, we're not consuming enough of electricity. Now the only problem is, if we are going to go all the way to e-mobility, there will be an increased demand. Now the problem is, if our green energy or our clean energy at the moment cannot supply that, so the prices will still have to deal with higher electricity prices. So the issue of going using e-mobility to reduce the fuel prices will also have to deal with another problem if there's no much foresight into that. And also on the last part, when it comes to equality, you had mentioned that I think it's important for the think tank to split between equity and equality, because equity is offering the opportunity, but now what I am seeing is people mixing the two, where people are forcing the outcomes and the and the opportunity. So if let's say you're given an opportunity, like let's say for the gender role, if you're given an opportunity to enter into politics, I don't think there should be a mandate or let's say a policy in place to force an outcome, because forcing equity is the same way as affirmative action. Because if let's say you're not undeniable, there's no way you can force an outcome. You need to be distinct. And also on agriculture, that's my question will be, I really don't understand how you will guarantee insurances for people's losses. So there's that. Yeah.
Great. Okay. Thanks, Dominic. So there's another hand. So I'll come to Francis, and then before I assign the question. So Francis, if you could unmute yourself and ask your question. Francis Mwangi, are you able to unmute yourself?
Yes, thank you. This is Francis Mwangi, working with Kenya Civil Aviation Authority. I'm a member. My question is in regard to the aviation component presentation on aviation part. Ideally, if you look the component on aviation, it's a key item. We take aviation as one of the transport mode. It's a key enabler for the industry that is Kenya. As currently we contribute about 0.9% of the GDP. So having the aviation as a key component, as one of transport mode, enhanced like the way we are seeing like Ethiopia, another country taking aviation development, including the airline as part of the infrastructure development, like the way we are doing the road, it can be a key item enabler to steer up the industry, because when you have proper hub, like you find out the hub has gone to Ethiopia, because there is better infrastructure. And when there is better infrastructure for the country, you improve also other service sector like tourism and also hotel. So in that idea, I think if it is well thought of, like aviation, we are doing already an aviation policy, which is supposed to advise in terms of investment, to know what component the government is supposed to take and what private sector is supposed to take. So that's my contribution. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks, Francis. So because I don't see another hand yet, I'll ask my colleagues. So Dominic asked a three-part question. So the first part was regarding universal health coverage. Then the second part was with regards to electricity and water. And lastly, the last part was with regards to inequality, equity versus equality. I'm not sure I got that last part of your question very well, Dominic, but I'll ask my colleague Maureen to respond because her presentation covered that. But first I'll ask, let's start with you, Emmanuel, your responses with regards to the questions on electricity, water, and you can also respond to Francis on the aviation. I know it was more of a comment, but if you have any quick response to that.
Sorry, I didn't get the question on electricity. If they could just repeat it. And
Hello. On
yes.
the matters of electricity, it wasn't really a question. It was more of a commentary, something that I noticed that you had missed on talking about it. It's more of like you say that e-mobility was a good thing, but you missed the part where if by any chance we were to manage that, if you increase the demand and yet we can't supply it, considering also our power plants are intermittent. So when the sun is not shining and the wind is not blowing, then we have a shortage. So there's that. So it may not really work as well. And also on the water. So
I think you can also clarify what exactly your question was with regards to the comments on equality versus.
Because they So it's more of like forcing an outcome and still offering an opportunity. Yet people are free to choose. So when people are making certain choices, then you can't really force an outcome on it. So that was my point. My only question was, when it comes to agriculture, how is it possible to guarantee farmers' losses? I don't think the government should be doing that. So if let's say someone could clarify on that, it would be great.
Okay, thanks. So
Right.
Emmanuel, want to say something?
Yes. So, okay, on the comment about e-mobility. So I did not say that e-mobility is a good thing because, you know, electric mobility, right? Public electric mobility is a considerable shift in the structure of public transport, right? So what I said is, first, Kenya Kwanza should show us what it is they have seen that has compelled them to propose that Kenya's public transport system needs to move towards e-mobility. We need to see what the compelling, because it's such a significant change from what we have now that it requires a bit more than just saying this is what we will do. And so that's what I will say on that. And the second point is providing the electricity for that. I I tried to convey that the provision of electricity should should uh, should it should be made along the lines of economic viability. We need to talk about effective demand. So that applies whether we're supplying electricity for households or for public transport, right? So what I was trying to say is they should show us a bit more of their argument. You know, it's a very, very deep, very profound proposal that they're making. Then the other question I believe was that you had was you made a comment about subsidizing losses in infrastructure, and I think Kemboy's my colleague actually iterated. He stated that the government should not be in the business of subsidizing one section of supplies, you know, because it's not the role of government, right? So I think we're in agreement on that point. Yes, I think that's it for me, right?
Yeah, thanks, Emmanuel. Then I'll ask Maureen, would you like to comment on the comments on equality, enforcing outcomes?
Okay, thank you. Okay, on the question of equality and equity, just from the dictionary explanation, equality is a state of being equal, especially in status, rights, or opportunities. I believe this is under the social protection pillar for the Kenya Kwanza plan, where they try to incorporate children, vulnerable senior citizens, and people living with disabilities by offering them sort of enablers to achieve their full potential. For instance, the children in terms of education and ending malnutrition. For the senior citizen, it's offering health coverage, the cash transfer systems, and also investing in healthcare for the older citizens. For the people living with disabilities, they still offer the health coverage, the 100% NHIF, among other things. So they incorporate the issue of equality in their plan.
Okay. I think, thanks, Maureen. I think I may have lost her. So I go now to a few more questions here that I see on the chat box. So there's one by Martin. He says, for me, the key policy question is how to tackle the structural inequality and poverty. I haven't had much on the role of social protection and more so social spending in reducing poverty and inequality. I think Maureen has just clarified. She's just spoken about that a little, and I'll also ask my other colleagues to respond. And then any focus on entrepreneurship is actually a direct positive externality to jobs because businesses create jobs. That's true. So I think Leo, maybe you can respond to Martin's question.
Yeah. So the policy question on how to tackle structural inequality and poverty, their assessment, and that's why they call it bottom-up, is to make an intervention from the labor market. And they speak about that 10 million that we call it the underutilized resource, to be able to effectively engage them through these micro, small, and medium enterprises, and by providing them capital. And they have a very powerful argument on that question of dealing with that structural inequality. So they want to deal with the structural imbalance in the real economy, and through a variety of measures to be able to yield, because now income would give you is that they call it the equalizing factor. Yeah. So, and then there's that question from Dominic on healthcare. So for them, I think for the purposes of they emphasize it's universal health coverage. It's coverage, not care. And the reason why there are different models globally, and the ones that you've seen, like the one of NHS and the rest, because this one is a three-tier system. It's not, there's a section dealing with primary healthcare, which government can effectively fund that. And then they have separated for the chronic illnesses and the chronic and catastrophic illnesses, to use their words in verbatim. That's a different question. That's a different question altogether. So they've separated the two, and there is on GMR. That's why we've said we have. We agree with everything else I've said in agriculture, with the exception of GMR, because I think for Kenya being we are not like the size of an arable land is less than 15%, and weather shocks actually affect us more often. That's why they have a very big investment on irrigation. That for them, they want to use risk tools, those various risk tools, to deal with the problem, because at present, only large-scale farmers are able to use insurance to guarantee their risk. But on the GMR part, we agree, even if it's going to work, it's going to give disproportionate benefit to large-scale farmers, and that is something that has implications for equality, and for now for inequality of opportunity, and in the long run, of course, income inequality either way. So thank you, Jackie. On aviation policy, just to state, on aviation policy, one thing that we did not emphasize is that KQ is not Kenya's aviation policy. And there's one article, if you Google, KQ is not Kenya's aviation, it should not define Kenya's aviation policy. You will see Kwame's article. Because there are other budget airlines. There are other airlines below, smaller airlines below KQ. And it should not determine aviation policy. Of course, they have their political formation, and they have the preference, but I think we need to underscore that point. And whether they will win off KQ in June, that is something that we are going to see. So thank you.
Great. Thanks a lot. So, Dominic, I see your hand is up again. I don't know if he's clarified or you'd like to very quickly unmute yourself and ask.
When it comes to chronic illnesses, now my issue is when they say lowering the cost of healthcare. Now the only problem is what we pay is prices. The cost has already been taken care of by the research team in the developed countries. So when it comes to chronic illnesses, if you look at universal healthcare or universal coverage, you find those ones who have implemented a government-run system, they have a longer waiting time compared to those that just use the private system. So you're finding, like let's say for Sweden, it's considered the best, yes, but it has a longer waiting time for people waiting for the chronic treatments. So there's that. So it's more of like, oh, okay, my now on this other part of the question is, will it be better to provide to give the private sector a better role when it comes to dealing with the chronic illnesses? Because a good example would be the Olkahoma Surgery Institute or something of the sort, where it's a building where they just offer those surgeries at a cheaper price compared to even the market rate. So there's that.
All right. Thanks, Dominic. Francis, I think you have another question, so you can unmute yourself.
Thank you, Jacqueline. Mine is just a clarity that, in terms of aviation policy, when we say aviation policy, we don't mean Kenya Airways, because if you look, aviation is not Kenya Airways. There is the airport, there is a regulator, and that's the confusion when the information goes out. It gets out that it's Kenya Airways, that the way it was coming out. But now the one we are doing, we're encompassing the whole infrastructure, that is from airport, aviation regulator, because you also have to have a regulator. And also if you are going to have our own carrier like Kenya Airways or others, all those infrastructure need to be thought in a wiser way, so that even if it's Jacqueline establishes her own airline, you can be able to use those infrastructure. It is not making sure that, because some of the airline change their harm because of availability of infrastructure. So the policy here we are saying is not the one to make a KQ a government entity. The policy we are saying here is the whole infrastructure encompassing all the components. Thank you.
Absolutely, thank you. I've seen a clap from my colleague Leo, so I think that's a brilliant clarification. So thanks for that. Does anyone else want to ask a question? Okay, so there's a debate, there's a discussion going on in the chat box for those who are interested. There has been some bit of clarification on Kenya Kwanza's position on public debt, something on a little more on inequality. So you can follow that, but I don't see any particular questions. So I think it's a conversation you can follow. But I'd just like Leo to respond to the question on, again, by Dominic on health, the comment he made. So if you'd like to make a quick response to that.
Yeah. So you see, the part of what we don't know much about the execution on this question related to the National Fund for Catastrophic Illnesses. But one thing that is clear now is that families are being bankrupted. The second largest component after food and rent is healthcare. All families on average spend 10% of the income on food. If you look at specific segments of the society, especially the ones who are not able to, at the bottom of the pyramid, these illnesses like cancer and the rest actually bankrupt families, and they are not able to do the same. So I think the scope of what will be covered under that national fund for is what that needs to come out. But evidently, NHIF as it is, the biggest problem that NHIF faces now is that those terminal diseases, the large actually take up more will bankrupt will bankrupt the fund because of the strain that it puts on it. So it's a good administrative to take that out, but the queuing, the specific numbers of the population that would be affected, and whether that would be queued as per the resources is something that the Kenya Kwanza needs to address. But in the first instance, that's the step, the first step. That's the first step, the first step of getting out the problem. I've seen the question from Andrea. Andrea has emphasized the question of debt. So in dealing with debt, there are two schools. So you have orthodox or heterodox. Orthodox is the one like the program that we under now, under the IMF. You do fiscal consolidation, you make savings from the surpluses, from the expenditure surpluses. You discipline spending, you do cuts here and there, and then with the hope that as it buys you fiscal space for you to be able to grow. Then there's the second school, which is the heterodox, which is like now this is using public information. Heterodox, which is like economic growth, the economy grows at a faster pace, and you're able to reduce the size of the debt stock, all the debt stock, and then you're also able to reduce the debt repayment on an annual basis. You're able because the revenue would grow faster. You're able to pay for the debt to do debt repayments at a faster pace. There's this big debate that most of those countries that went through the heterodox path were able to get out of the crisis. Others, like the ones that have been in the program, like the Argentina, Pakistan, Greece, there are so many examples. Have not been able to go through the process. So they've chosen the growth path. Now the big problem is, the economy is a system. It's not like a static phenomenon. So if these factors converge quickly, what financial reengineering are they going to put on the table? But if they have that fiscal space, they're able to get that growth of 7-8% that is private sector led to be able to get the economy out. That could be a part that would be welcome. So part of it is, and for me, what I think is a mixture of both. If you have 4 significant creditors, like all ID organizations together, if you have the Chinese debt and the international sovereign bond holders, and you can voluntarily restructure the Chinese debt, that would be a part that would give relief at a question. So I think that's that for me.
Jacqueline, I think you are muted. We can't hear you.
Sorry about that. Leo, before you, so there's a question here by Andrea. I wanted just your clarification. So the statement here is that the conclusion is that the Kenya Kwanza plan actually does not have a plan for debt. Is that an accurate conclusion? Because the comment here says that that's pretty significant for an assessment of the ability to execute. Is that a proper conclusion to make from this, from what you've been saying?
Yeah, but with the exception of, so for them, with the exception of, so you know, like it's, I don't want to belabor that, because you know debt is as a result of deficits. So they have a proposal on deficit. On the so are they going to leave the domestic debt market? They want to reduce that deficit to something, that appetite, risk appetite, to the government appetite for domestic debt smaller. For the rest of the part, they don't mention expressly directly what is related to what they are going to do about the debt. Not like like one of the things that we saw from the Azimio's debt plan is that they had a dedicated chapter to debt. For Kenya Kwanza, they do not have a dedicated chapter to debt.
Great. So lastly, again, because of time, so one last one by Dominic, still on healthcare. Isn't it possible to use the private sector, since private sector has more facilities in place than the public sector? What is the possibility of using digital marketplace for hospitals to increase competition while offering the consumer more price options? So I don't know who would like to go first with that response. Emmanuel, would you like to, or Leo, one of you can respond to that?
Yeah. Okay. So healthcare. So one of the things that that we noticed from the plan is that there is the insurance scheme that they are proposing as a choice question. So it's not going to be like at present where NHIF, you are only limited to some specific benefits at the public hospital. So it's going to be interchangeable. So that is so using competition on that is a question, a question that needs to come up. So the second question is now, what is the second part of the question is, what is using digital marketplace for hospitals to create competition? I think we have to look at the realities of on the ground. And this is a digital marketplace, like for example, MyDawa and the rest, is actually an urban area phenomena, and it's even specific to the capital, Nairobi. It's not, so it's one part that they could choose, but still relatively an urban area phenomenon. But the emphasis on choice, which is actually like competition, allowing consumers to choose different, to choose either public or private or even faith-based, or is something that is welcome. So thank you.
Great. So thanks for that. We had promised to be done by 12, so we are well over our time. But so now I'll ask my colleagues to make their closing remarks. But as you do so, just two things that I'd like to hear from you. In terms of revenue, raising revenues to finance this entire plan, and again, the viability of, or how easy it will be to implement the plan. I'd like to hear like your quick comments in terms of whether you think the plans that they have will generate enough revenue to respond to that. And lastly, in your assessment, whether the plan actually does live up to their proposition to have a bottom-up economic model, because that's in essence what the coalition has staged as the platform for which they're running. So does it live up to that in your perspective? And do you think they'll be able to raise enough revenue to finance these plans? So do that as you give us your closing remarks. I'll start with you, Maureen.
Okay, thank you, Jackie. On revenue generation, I think they've outlined a number of things that they're planning to do. For instance, on the commitments in foreign policy and regional integration, on the commitment of creating a creative and robust foreign policy, they want to expand the market for products and services by taking advantage of membership in regional organization. I believe that will generate revenue. Whether it will live up to the bottom-up economic model, okay, that I can't answer. And yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Maureen. She will not make any comments as to whether or not the proposal responds to the bottom-up economic model. Emmanuel, what are your thoughts?
Thank you. In closing, we think that, and I think that Kenya Kwanza has arranged their priorities in a way that makes sense, starting all the way up from agriculture and working their way down to foreign policy. It's clear what they think. There is a rhyme to and a reason to the way that they have rhymed their policies. And even with regards to infrastructure, we do see a mixed bag between what the actual role of the government is from a perspective of economic principles, and where they think that they want the government to intervene, which is a lot of a mix between providing private goods and providing public goods. And I also think even within the realm of infrastructure in particular, this use of funds, of more and more public funds, is not as good of or as principled of an economic platform as it sounds like it is, as it might sound to some audience. Maybe they're directing their messaging to some audience that I do not know about. And so finally, I would say that they are short on details for some of their most bold proposals, and that we would like to see more details there. Thank you.
I'm sorry, before you go, my question on the proposal, do you think it actually propels the bottom-up economic model from your analysis? Is it an accurate, is the plan an accurate representation of the model that they propose?
In instances, it comes close. It comes close to that. In other instances, it seems to privilege those who are not in the bottom, whether they be in terms of political power or office or economic stratum. So there are instances like where that it's not as clear. So if I give one example, bottom up, when we talk about the giving the youth some opportunities, why should they be privileged over someone older, right? As if to say that necessarily the youth are at the bottom or are at some, I mean, perhaps they're at the bottom in terms of age, but it's not clear that that's a very useful distinction for policy making. So yes, bottom up, it's on the surface, but when you dig up and you open up the hood, no principles. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Thanks, Emmanuel. I highly doubt that what they meant by bottom up is, I mean, in terms of the youth. And we'd also like some clarification with regards to whether that Hustler Fund specifically is, they've disaggregated the beneficiaries to primarily be only youth or the hustler, or actually just the proper definition of who the hustler will be or is defined as. So thanks for that. We go to Leo, your final thoughts.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that stand out is how the fiscal framework, how they're going to run the fiscal framework, questions on the regulation, because they've committed to review taxation, regulatory, and bureaucracy issues. They mentioned significantly across different chapters of productivity. And then, of course, the biggest concern for me is the ASLA fund and the ability around the ASLA fund. And that's something that will stay on for a bigger, yeah. And I think based on the significant public debate on that, they are not planning to address governance agenda. They ended up addressing a governance agenda, and it takes the institutional approach. And I don't know what it says, what the anti-corruption, what it says specifically, but the institutional approach and the question of independence of those specific institutions is something that that comes out strongly in that, and then the quasi-judicial aspect. So in terms of all those, for me, I think, and the biggest issue is to reject the economy, the question of the economy, and then they go back as far as in the 60s, and then coming all the way now that the political economy analysis. I think those are things that stand out. I know for the question that you've asked, whether it lives up to the bottom up. They have a chapter on the bottom up, and they speak about the existence of a dichotomy, which means it's like a pyramid. A dichotomy is like different separations, and that dichotomy, and it's a labor force intervention through the micro, small, medium enterprises. And then they have the reasons why they think these small, medium enterprises would be able to create those specific jobs. And then I think it's just to run with their team that the jobs, these small enterprises, informal enterprises, both formal and informal MSMEs, are the ones that will create the most jobs practically. And that is something that they're speaking about. So I think the argument of bottom up is something that they've saved for some inconsistencies, because again, there are inconsistencies to that idea. But the idea itself, the way it's written, if somebody is able to read that chapter, it's 2 pages, you'd be able to understand what bottom up is and why they are doing that. So it's at that moment. So just to say something on debt, they focused on the primary cause of debt, which is fiscal deficit, through that fiscal framework. So, and I think they believe something that is inconsistent with economic literature, that the mess that the debt crisis that Jubilee created is something that there's no jail. There's this term that most people like to say about, and the IEA, we've even said it before. There's no jail out of free card out of jail. And that is something that I think they recognize. So whether growth is going to come and whether they'll address is something that to ponder about and those specific issues within the plan. Thank you.
Right. Thank you. On behalf of all the participants on this call, a big round of applause for my colleagues. So thanks a lot to the of them, Maureen, Emmanuel, and Leo, for that very detailed analysis and the equally detailed presentations. And also thanks to everyone who's been in attendance of this meeting and useful engagement and the discussions that we've had here. So we thank you. This presentation will be shared as soon as we conclude this meeting. If you go to IEA's website, you can also find our previous presentations, the one on the Azimio plan, as well as all the other presentations from our previous webinars. So we'll also share this. We are very aware that we do not have only 2 candidates. The 2 that we've discussed so far are the leading candidates, but we have 2 more, and we actually have all the manifestos available now. So, we may communicate in future if we will have a separate webinar to look at the other 2, if that discussion would be useful. But so far what we have is what we've shared, and we hope, we hope that this will be useful in helping you make an informed choice regarding what you think which plan you think would makes more viable, or rather provides more viable solutions to the problems that we currently face. So, on behalf of the IEA, I'd like to thank you very much again for attending this webinar. The IEA is a membership institution. Joining to be an IEA member, you can get in touch with our communications team. They'll be able to assist you, or just go to our website and click on the membership, and you'll be redirected on how you can be one of our members. So we thank you. Look out for our future webinars. Kindly follow IEA on all our digital platforms at IEA Kenya, and we hope that as we prepare for the elections, we'll be able to make some informed choices based on the knowledge that we have now. So thank you, and I wish you all a good afternoon.